The invisible misalignment that stiffens your psoas does not respond to stretching because the rigidity does not come from a tight muscle, but from a silent shift in the axis between your body and gravity. This imbalance grows without warning, and when the center moves forward, the psoas is called upon to hold the weight that proper alignment has lost. Stretching without correcting this distortion is like treating the symptom while the cause remains untouched. The tension you feel is not from a lack of flexibility. It comes from a body that no longer trusts its own foundation. You are about to learn a gravity-based adjustment built on 3 pillars that brings your center back over your heels, realigns your pelvis, and reconnects your brain with your hips. This protocol gives your skeleton the ability to support itself without tension, releasing the stiffness that stretching could never reach. But before it can let go, there is something your nervous system needs to recognize. Leaving this video now means missing the exact moment when your body identifies where the misalignment is and how to correct it through gravitational adjustment. What you are about to discover will show you why stretching failed and why gravitational adjustment is what finally allows the psoas to release. When your body weight shifts beyond the support base your heels should provide, your center of gravity moves forward, and the ground stops being perceived as a safe foundation. Your body begins to float over chronic instability that your brain reads as an imminent fall. In that moment, something deep is called upon to hold what alignment can no longer support. This silent distortion reorganizes everything around the loss of safety. Hermetic traditions described the body as a vertical column between heaven and earth. The axis mundi, where the creative force descends and takes shape in matter. When that axis tilts, when the plumb line is lost, creation contracts with it. The channel where intention was supposed to flow becomes a trench where everything must be held together. Verticality was never just posture. It was the condition for the invisible to take form in the visible world. The psoas is the only muscle that connects the lumbar spine to the femur, passing through the center of the body like a bridge between the torso and the legs. When the brain senses that the center has shifted and that there is no reliable base, it recruits the psoas as an emergency stabilizer. Rigidity does not come from muscular weakness. It comes from a survival strategy where the psoas is called to hold what alignment no longer supports, keeping you upright when your axis can no longer do so on its own. Somatic neuroscience has shown that the brain does not distinguish real danger from structural danger. When your weight shifts beyond the base, the autonomic nervous system activates the same defense circuits it would in response to an external threat. Polyvagal theory shows that a body out of balance remains in a state of defensive mobilization or subtle collapse, interpreting postural instability as ongoing threat. The psoas then lives in a state of constant semi-contraction because the brain still believes you could fall at any moment. The stiffness you feel when you get out of bed, the disproportionate back fatigue in the middle of the day, the sensation of carrying invisible weight in your hips. These are all signs that this distortion is at work. Your body is saying it does not trust the ground, it does not feel a real foundation, and it has to hold everything up on its own because alignment with gravity has been lost. But there is someone who lived this experience in a visceral way, who tried stretching, strengthening, adjusting, and only found relief after discovering how to reposition their own axis. That person's story sheds light on what you have just come to understand. Karen was 42 years old and worked as an accountant at a small company. Her daily routine required hours sitting down, reviewing spreadsheets, and closing monthly reports. But her body paid a price far beyond what made sense for each movement. Getting up from her chair in the middle of the afternoon triggered hip stiffness that felt like her legs were glued to her torso. Her lower back would flare up without warning. And walking to the archive at the back of the office took an effort that didn't match the short distance. She had already tried physical therapy focused on strengthening her core, thinking that stronger muscles would solve the instability. She did yoga 3 times a week for months, chasing a flexibility that never really came. Myofascial release with a foam roller brought momentary relief, but the stiffness always returned, as if something deeper was still holding everything tight. Stretching her Psoas was part of her morning routine, but the feeling of locked hips and a reactive lower back remained, especially when she had to stand for long periods of time. The most unsettling sensation was the constant weight projected forward, as if her body were always leaning into a fall. Karen noticed her breathing was shallow, the air didn't go beyond her chest, and the fatigue in her back felt disproportionate to the effort of her day. Sleep didn't restore her. Waking up brought stiffness. It felt like she was carrying something invisible that her body could never release, even when she tried to relax. It was during a casual conversation with a co-worker that she first heard about a body therapist, specialized in gravitational reorganization. Her co-worker mentioned that he worked with something called structural integration, observing how the body related to gravity before even touching a single muscle. Karen booked a session. When he saw her standing, he watched in silence for nearly a minute before pointing out something no one had ever mentioned before. Her center was shifted forward. Her heels had lost their function as a base. Her Psoas was holding what her axis could no longer support. He offered her a 3-pillar protocol. They started with repositioning her center over her heels. Karen stood with her back to the wall, and he asked her to feel where the weight of her feet touched the floor. Within the first few minutes, something changed. Her lower back began to release effortlessly, as if her body had finally found where to rest. Her breathing deepened. Her hips softened. For the first time in years, she felt real ground beneath her feet. What Karen discovered in that moment is the same adjustment you are about to experience now in your own body. The first pillar begins with a somatic reading of your own imbalance. Stand up, barefoot if possible, and observe where the weight in your feet meets the ground. Don't judge, just notice. Most people feel the weight concentrated at the front of their feet, in the toes and the base of the metatarsals, while the heels feel almost weightless. This distribution reveals that the center of gravity has shifted forward and that the body has lost its connection to a true foundation. Now, step close to a wall and stand with your back about 10 centimeters away from it. Let your hands rest lightly against the wall behind you, just as a point of reference. Gently bend your knees without forcing and begin to shift your weight toward your heels. Feel the bone of your heel pressing into the ground as if it were rooting into the earth. The contact should be firm, not harsh. It is a pressure that anchors, not one that pushes. As your weight redistributes toward the back, observe what happens in your lower back. It may begin to release without any effort on your part. The exaggerated curve that kept your Psoas under tension starts to ease because the body has finally found a place to rest. Your breathing shifts. The air moves more easily into your abdomen because your diaphragm now has room to move. Stay in this position for at least 1 minute, breathing slowly, feeling the ground beneath your heels. The second pillar is pelvic reorientation, still keeping your weight on your heels. Place one hand on your iliac crest, the bone you feel on the side of your hip. Place your other hand on your pubic bone at the front of your pelvis. Feel the tilt between these 2 points. In most cases, the pelvis is tilted forward, creating an anterior tilt that keeps the psoas in constant contraction. Now, without forcing, make a micro movement into a posterior tilt. Imagine you are gently drawing your pubic bone upward toward your navel while your tailbone lowers toward the floor. This movement doesn't need to be big. It's a tiny adjustment, but a deep one. As the pelvis reorients, the psoas receives the signal that it no longer needs to hold. The lower back begins to lengthen, the rib cage aligns above the pelvis, and the axis between sky and earth begins to restore itself. Breathe into this new configuration. Feel how your breath flows without resistance, how the weight is more evenly distributed across your feet, how the tension in your hips starts to ease. Now integrate conscious breathing with the pelvic adjustment. Inhale deeply, allowing your abdomen to expand. Exhale slowly, and as you exhale, gently deepen the posterior tilt, as if your tailbone was sinking further downward. Repeat this 5 times. With each exhalation, the psoas releases a little more. With each inhalation, your body stacks more precisely over the recovered base. You are reversing the defensive flexion pattern that was keeping everything locked. Before completing the protocol, there is something essential about Karen that must be revealed. Karen continued the adjustment for weeks, practicing both the repositioning and the pelvic reorientation every day. In the first 2 weeks, her morning stiffness decreased in ways she hadn't expected. Getting out of bed no longer brought that locked feeling in her hips. Walking to her car in the morning no longer required the disproportionate effort it once did. Her lower back stopped flaring up midday, and she realized she could stand for long periods without feeling that invisible weight pulling everything forward. But what surprised her most was the change in her breathing. Karen had always breathed shallowly, assuming it was just anxiety. When her axis reorganized, when the psoas finally let go, air began to flow effortlessly down into her abdomen. The constant state of alert faded. She began taking long walks again on weekends, something she had given up because her body couldn't handle it. Projects that had been on hold for months began to move forward again because her body was no longer an obstacle. What Karen felt is exactly what you were beginning to notice. Now the axis returning, the psoas releasing, the base restored. Your body is finally beginning to trust the ground. The third pillar is neuromotor adjustment, which reconnects the brain, the feet, and the hips. Step away from the wall and begin walking slowly through your space. With each step, bring your attention to the heel that first touches the ground. Feel the contact of the bone with the surface. Notice how your weight rolls from the heel to the front of the foot, and how your hip moves from this reorganized center. The psoas is now participating in the movement, functionally mobilizing the hip, not holding the spine. Now, while standing, make small weight transfers from one foot to the other. Shift your weight completely to your right leg, feeling your right heel grounded firmly into the floor. Then transfer to the left. Repeat this 10 times, slowly. With each transfer, your cerebellum is learning where your real center is. Your nervous system is recalibrating its relationship with gravity, and your psoas is being released from its role as a permanent guard. Now integrate the 3 pillars. Reposition your center over your heels. Reorient your pelvis with a gentle posterior tilt, and walk with attention to the feedback rising from the ground through the back line of your legs. Feel how your body moves from a stable base, not from chronic compensation. This is your new body memory being recorded. Defense is no longer necessary. The axis is restored. The psoas has returned to its original role. The core protocol is now complete. What comes next is the moment to seal this reorganization within your body. The physical marker that confirms this reorganization is found in the breath that now flows effortlessly down into your abdomen, in the lower back that relaxes when you stand, in the sensation of weight evenly distributed between both feet. Your hips no longer react with tension at the slightest movement. This is the sign that the misalignment has been corrected and that the Psoas has returned to its functional tone. Your body has regained trust in its own foundation. To anchor this reorganization, use a simple signal gesture. Stand up, apply gentle pressure through your heels into the ground as if you were rooting, and take 3 deep breaths. As you breathe, place one hand on your iliac crest and feel the vertical axis from your feet to the top of your head. This gesture takes just 30 to 60 seconds and can be repeated anytime, discreetly, whenever you need to reconnect with your reorganized center. When you feel stiffness returning to your hips or your lower back flaring up for no clear reason, return to the repositioning over your heels. Adjust your pelvis with a gentle posterior tilt. Integrate conscious breathing and repeat internally as you make the adjustment. My axis supports. My center trusts. This protocol turns what you've learned into a portable tool for the days, weeks, and months ahead. What has now been sealed in your body creates space to understand what has truly been restored. What has truly been restored goes beyond the stiffness that released or the lower back that softened. It is an axis that has returned to being a channel where intention flows downward and becomes action, not a trench where everything must be held together. It is a foundation that allows you to create without collapsing along the way. The Psoas no longer lives in defense because your center has begun to trust the ground again. What changed was not just your posture, it was your ability to support your own life without constant sacrifice. This gravitational adjustment is just the beginning. There are other layers of somatic reorganization waiting to be accessed. Other knots of inherited trauma crystallized in different areas of the body. Other bridges between gravity and consciousness that this channel explores. The misalignment you corrected today is one of the doorways. There are others, and each one reveals a new territory of bodily freedom and presence. Ida Rolf used to say that when gravity flows through the skeleton in an orderly way, healing happens spontaneously. Peter Levine adds that trauma is not in the event itself, but in the incomplete response that still remains. When the axis is restored, when there is trust in your own base, the structure stops, resisting life and becomes a temple once again, able to hold divine presence. Gravitational reorganization is both somatic healing and a return to the sacred. If this knowledge touched something deep within you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so this content can reach more people who carry the same invisible misalignment. Share it with someone you know who needs to recover their own axis. If you'd like to support the creation of this kind of rare and profound content, consider becoming a member of the channel. Your support sustains the development of practices that you won't find anywhere else. Write in the comments, I correct the invisible misalignment and release my Psoas. This affirmation anchors the practice and manifests the transformation in the vibrational field. The written word seals what has been experienced. To keep exploring other somatic reorganization techniques available on the channel, click the video appearing on your screen now. There is so much more to discover about how your structure can return to being a vehicle, not an obstacle. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how we remain standing, but what we do with the freedom that comes when we finally stop defending ourselves from gravity and begin to dance with it.